Buenos
Dias.
buenos
Buenos dias.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy Monday.
And happy Halloween. Wait.
Christmas. It's
Cri-
Christmas.
Happy
Yeah.
Christmas. Hey, last week was Hanukkah.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, last
Oh.
Monday or Tuesday, I think.
I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you do?
You're asking the wrong guy. Asking the wrong guy. We should figure that out.
Yeah. It's kind of like saying to me, like, last week was Tuesday.
Oh.
I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that because I could guess using what I think is in there, but I think I'm gonna be way off.
No. We should just roll on.
Yeah.
Act like nothing happened.
Yeah.
Take two.
Ready?
Good morning.
Good morning. Oh,
Hey.
cheers. Good
Welcome.
morning.
Hi.
Clink, clink.
Oh, this will be the first sip of coffee today. Yeah, the most disgusting thing in like office spaces, right? Is just to listen to people slurping on their coffee.
No, there's one thing that's a little more grosser than that, and it's people cutting their fingernails.
Oh,
I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say it has a higher percentage chance of happening around engineers because maybe they're not quite as aware that that's not the best thing to do in a business situation. But every place I've worked, I think, and even like when I was at one company but moved offices, I feel like it was just a matter of time until you hear that click, click, click.
so why does this bother you?
Honestly, it it's not really gross. That's never grossed me out. Some people think it's like, oh, how are you doing that in here? Like, why aren't you doing that in the bathroom? I'm like, it's just like fingernails. Like, what do you?
Yeah.
I mean, one, are they really that dirty? Especially if you're washing your hands all the time. And two, or dipping them in brake fluid like you like to.
Right. I know.
Yeah.
Toxic chemicals.
Or and two, like even if they are dirty, like okay, they're probably flying on the floor. Are you like licking the floor?
Yeah, I think
like,
that's the most annoying part to me is that you find shreds of them. It's like they never go out of their way to capture all 10. It's like they get like 8 of them on a little pile.
So I'm just gonna go around your house with a pencil sharpener
Yeah,
and just
right.
like partially
That's what
twist it.
That's
So
what
just
it
like the
is.
little short clippings
Like,
just
fall
fall
everywhere
throughout.
Yeah, except for it's even better because if you walk around your house barefoot and you go,
Oh, not
man.
again.
Yeah.
Dang it. But yeah, honestly, the only bad thing about it is kind of distracting, If
Yeah.
it's got a very distinctive sound that cuts through the air. Like it's so different from the closest thing I guess would be like a stapler as far as office sound goes, but it's 2021. How often are you hearing a stapler?
Yeah.
So like when you hear that, it's that high pitch which just cuts through the air, and then you're like sitting there at your desk trying to focus or not trying to focus, whatever it is you're doing at your desk. And then you're like, oh, now I have an excuse, something I can focus on and yell and blame other people for.
Oh, well then that's great.
Yeah.
I mean, finally,
Exactly.
I don't have to blame it on myself for
Right.
screwing up. It was Johnny over there.
I
with the fingernail
had the
clippers.
numbers in there just perfectly right, but then I missed a decimal place because of
Yeah,
Johnny.
it was the rhythm of that clipping. It was just along the way. You're just like, lose count. It happens all the time.
And honestly, maybe another way to look at it is that whole, concept of if you didn't bring enough to share, then you shouldn't bring enough. So,
like we should have the real solution to this is clipping parties.
yes,
everyone
he
bring
or
your
she
fingernail
should be
clippers.
clipping everyone's nails.
Yeah.
You come by,
know.
like, man. And maybe it's a reminder of like the nail clipping I need to do, and then I'm like, But,
man,
yeah,
I feel like I always need to do nail clipping. It's,
they just keep growing.
so weird.
It's weird.
Yeah.
So anyways, welcome to What the Hell is Water? Today is Monday, December 6th, 2021. We are on episode 48.
Whoa, 48.
That means we've done 49 episodes.
I wrote on the board 49 because I can't remember. But yeah,
Pretty
we're
close.
really close to 50. What are we gonna do for 50? Another episode.
We'll have to plan on that.
Something amazing.
I was waiting until we got to 50 to plan because today's topic is actually procrastination.
Oh, hey.
Yeah, that's pretty suitable. So we'll find out what we're gonna do for 50.
Okay.
Yeah, we
5
are.
minutes
We're gonna-
before.
Yeah, good. No, not a minute before. So on Friday, episode 47, We had brought on a guest named Hunter Hodnett, and he is a guy who happened to go to school with me growing up. And also my wife happened to have a little crush on back in, 5th grade and probably after that too. So I thought, what better reason to bring somebody on? What else do you need to know?
Why not make this really complicated?
Yeah.
No, well, my mom texted me after the show and said, she goes, I really enjoyed the marketing guy. Like, I want to hear more from him. And I was like, awesome. So, yeah.
But is it because of him, or is it because his hair was styled just the right
I
way?
think it was the mood lighting in
And
the
mood
episode.
lighting.
Like,
There
he did a
was some
really
pretty
great
good mood
job with
lighting.
the lighting.
Yeah. Well, cool. We'll have to make sure Hunter hears that. But what we were actually talking with him about was, we were talking about marketing and growing a business, and he is in the process of starting his own business. And we talked a little bit as well about the different ways you can fund an organization. With him, he's working on what's called the venture capital model, also known as VC for short. And we defined a couple of terms just loosely. We kind of scratched the surface. I think we'll probably go back and do a more focused education session on it, because there are a lot of terms involved there. Talked about pre-seed, family and friends money, Series A, IPO, which is an initial public offering. So we talked a little bit about what those terms mean and how they can affect someone who's starting their business from scratch. And we didn't even really get into the pros and cons of all of the different methods, because one of the other methods is bootstrapped, which is the way that we're going. And then yet another method we compared to was what Angela Poon of Community Garden Kitchen is doing, which is the nonprofit, where you're raising money basically all the time, or you because you're not generating revenue with a nonprofit, usually at least. Yeah. And so, we kind of touched on the surface of the difference between those three. And then we talked a lot with Hunter about the main point of the discussion was, hey, how do you know when to build the thing versus when to market the thing? Because guess what? If you don't ever market the thing, then no one's ever going to buy it.
Yeah, and I thought we talked a little bit about that chicken egg thing. Like, when you're doing marketing, like, do you have the product first? Do you not? Do you have the idea? Which one do you pitch? How do you build? What's his timing on these things? Yeah, all that's really complicated, and there's lots of different paths and techniques you can do. And most people are doing several at once. Just trying to cover all their bases, which is a lot of work.
Yeah.
Hence the need for funding.
Yeah.
Because you got to get some help.
And here with What the Hell is Water and Helpful for Life, we wanted to have that conversation because it's something that we're going through right now, right? We talked about how on the back end, right now, each one of these episodes is roughly an hour long. And we recognize that we need to cut that up into more digestible chunks. We got to mama bird it, eat it, spit it back out for people to better easily digest. So that way they can share it,
I like that. That's going to have to be, we're calling them snippets. Maybe it's just, masticated material
masticated
right now.
Worms.
Yeah. That's what we're offering people. Yeah. Come get some of this. It's going to be great.
Suck
I
it
promise.
down.
Yeah. Oh.
We're high in protein.
Yeah.
Ding.
Ding.
So that's what we talked about on Friday, and because we were talking about marketing, we thought it would be an apt challenge for you guys, our listener audience, to share the show. So having listened to hopefully one, if not a couple of audiences, not a couple of shows by this point, or at least some chunks of shows, it's extremely helpful to us if you share it. And, that could be literally clicking the share button and then copying a link and sending that to somebody. Or it could be the good old-fashioned way of just talking with someone and being like, hey, Ryder, let's pretend Ryder's name wasn't Ryder, because otherwise he'd be talking about himself, which he never does. So, Susie.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Susie, the other day I was watching this show, and I was kind of watching it first because there's video and they've got crazy hair and they do some funny looking gags, but mostly it's an audio show, so I had him on in the background. But it's what the hell is water? Have you ever heard of that before?
No. Well, I mean, obviously it's hydrogen and oxygen. I should get on there and tell those guys.
You should. Susie, your voice just goes all over the place here. And yeah, it's an interesting show because one of the points of it is every day you can just start with one little thing to make your life a little bit better. And they have a lot of fun the whole time they're doing it. They laugh all the time. They tell jokes. Like one time they was like, hey, why did the chicken cross the road?
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
That's a great joke.
It,
It's
it,
one of
it
my
was a great one,
favorites.
and you had to watch to figure
Yeah.
out what the joke was. It was hilarious. I was like, man, I'd never heard someone take that angle on him before.
Oh man, what it sounds like a great
Yeah,
show.
it is
I should
because
probably check it out.
you should, and see, this is how one of these person-to-person interactions might go.
Yeah, yeah. That was a great example. Right
That was a
there.
great
Yeah.
example. So let's go ahead and just roll the intro. Helpful for life. Welcome to What the Hell is Water. I'm Reed Garcia, founder of Helpful for Life.
Oh, I nearly cut in there. Sorry, you can't interrupt the founder and
Yep,
CEO.
yep.
This is Ryder Richards.
Take three. Welcome to What the Hell is Water. I'm Reed Garcia, founder of Helpful Life, the leader of this show, guy who's sitting in the chair, and one who's talking until he's no longer interrupted, Reed Garcia.
This is Ryder Richards, the guy sitting on the couch with vestigial claws called, nails.
Nails.
Yeah, I'm that guy.
Someone get him a clipper.
Yeah.
Someone get him a clipper. So we here at What the Hell is Water, we're experts in marketing, clearly.
Obviously. I mean, maybe we would be experts. I think the way you could tell is we'd be sitting on an even bigger couch.
As success comes, the couch gets bigger.
Yeah, that's what happens.
And it may upgrade from this lovely $20 couch that we found on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist or some other place where they were giving us used wares. I bet we could sell nail clippings on there too.
Oh, that's horrible.
So yes. All right. So for today, episode 48, we're going to talk a little bit about procrastination. And we've talked about it briefly on the show before, but I think it's one that we'll probably talk about many times because frankly, I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with. And I also think that there's a lot of factors at play in society right now that make it really easy to procrastinate. Namely, if there's literally anything that you want to do to distract you from the thing that you need to be doing, you can find it today and age, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of options out there now.
Yes, there are. And so I wanted to talk about procrastination a little bit from the angle, too, of, when it comes to a creative endeavor, how is procrastination the same or different? And also, when you're working on something, how do you know when it's good enough, when it's done? Because that's, one, hard enough in general, but I feel like the more creative of an endeavor it gets, the harder it gets to have that, okay, here's where we're going to call it. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and we're gonna see how that goes because we have a couple of other topics that we might touch on, but let's start off with that and then see where it takes us.
Yeah. So for my background, for those of you who are just tuning in, then I have a degree in fine arts. So I've got 2 degrees in painting. I mostly do
Real quick, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Why is it called fine arts?
I don't know, but the acronym for it at school, it's usually F-art.
So you're perfect.
Yeah,
You're like, okay, I can take this 2 ways. It's either saying fart or it's saying F-art.
F-art.
Yeah, both of which are good.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. So that's what drew me into the field.
All right, so you were fine. You were doing fine arts.
It was.
Something about sculpting.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be delicate or something. I don't know. Whatever. You have to put on a fancy accent. But yeah, so I was doing drawings and then got more into painting because apparently it's hard to get into grad school for drawing. So you could get a degree in, anyway, I'm digressing, but I have a lot of experience not only in making objects, but then I started running galleries. So then you're pulling the artists into your gallery to show their work. You market their work to a certain extent, which was never a whole lot for me, but there was some of that was going on. Sometimes you work to sell their work, sometimes you don't. Just sort of depends on what the gallery setup and mission is. And there's also the types of art that you're showing. Some work is never meant to be sold. It's only meant to be shown, and the artists just gain reputational value from it, not monetary value. So just depending on what you're doing in the art world, there's all these kind of groups of people that you're working with at different times. Each one of these creators out there, these artists, they, of course, want to have a show. And they tend to want to have it at your place, and then you try to set up a situation to make them shine, and then it's on them. And that's kind of an interesting spot to get into because you set up the facilities and the platform and everything else, and you use your contacts and marketing and all these things, and you could be using it on any of thousands of artists. And sometimes you get a real jerk as an artist who comes through, and you're just like, I can't believe we wasted our time, energy, and expertise on this person. And so that's where reputational value comes in pretty handy. If someone isn't going to pull something off, if they're not going to handle it the right way, if they're going to be a jerk, there's always a nicer person down the road who makes probably equally as good work. So that was the difficult part about running the galleries. And then I also have been part of, I think, 4 collaborative art groups, and that's anywhere from 2 to 3 people to 14 people in a group where we have exhibitions that are based around being a group. So you come in as a group and say, we are a culture laboratory collective, and we will do this based around these ideas and these words pulled from this, very famous person. And you sort of pull together these shows that offer a lot of reputational value almost as a package to the gallery. And so you try to make it as easy on the gallery as possible to say yes, just like writing for a grant or anything else. You just try to hit all the boxes. And so I've done a lot of these kind of things. And what's fascinating is every situation is different. Every one of them is novel, and every individual has their own path that they want to take, despite the sort of group dynamic or despite whatever the gallery wants them to do.
Yeah. So there's a lot there. And for people who are like, oh, well, I don't care about the art world, I have nothing to do with the art world, and they roll their eyes. I mean, I have some thoughts on why this applies to a broader field, but what would you say to that?
Oh, no, I would agree that anything you learn in life can apply to multiple fields. So the idea of caring about the art world or not, that's really not the point overall. The point overall is that there are people who are trying to work and create and produce, and they're trying to generate. Some people are trying to generate value. Some people are trying to generate reputation. It's great when they go together, but they don't have to. So
yeah, no. So I think there's a handful of things in here that we should unpack. First off, one of the ways about talking about creating things is to kind of simplify it and say, all right, you're creating a widget. Mm-hmm. And that's just kind of a way of saying, hey, we have a widget factory. We make widgets. It's just a way of saying something. You're making a thing, right? Mm-hmm. And so in the case of art, you're making a thing, which oftentimes is something on a canvas or wood or some sort of drawing or painting or sculpture or something like that, especially if it's fine,
Yeah, fine art.
Fine art. There was that not so fine art, then it kind of went away. And then there's the dark arts, which
there was
is away, but is it still
here that was called Not So Fine Arts?
Nice.
Yeah.
I like it. I like it. So there's a couple of things there, First off is recognizing just from a business perspective, the different parties in play, right? Mm-hmm. So there's the artist, then there's the gallery, and then there's the end consumer. And there's other parties at play too in this case, yeah. Right? But let's simplify it to that for now. So there's the artist, who we'll call the creator, right? And then there's the studio, which has people behind it as well, the curator, whatnot, a museum, whatever term you want to use for that. And they're kind of like the market place in some ways. And then there's the end consumer, which would be just the average Joes and Janes of the world who would be going to this show, potentially buying the art, potentially paying to go to this exhibit, potentially hobnobbing with the people, all of that type of stuff. And then you're looking at value. Where does the value come from in this? And the interesting thing in the art world, as is also true a lot of times in the business world as well, is, there is value provided that's sometimes paid for with money, sometimes paid for through other things, right?
Yeah. There's a lot that goes on there, a lot of different dynamics, and it's just like any other kind of business. It's like school. There's all these kind of different paths you can take, and each one of them has sort of a different goal at the end. So the only reason I sort of went into a little bit of more depth on that is just to say that there's several different lenses at which you can look at creation. You can look at creation as being the person making the widget. You can be looking at the creation as the person running the gallery, in which you're shaping some sort of reputational thing for yourself and potentially selling something from there. There's also this kind of idea of creating a group of creators and the challenges that come along with that. So that's sort of a team aspect. So it's not individual.
Yeah, and there's different levels of that creation process you can be a part of. Mm-hmm. And then also, there's the challenge and the realities of, hey, at the very least, I need money to eat and live. So money's got to be tied in somehow. But then there's also this other aspect, which is reputation and social value that enables you to get more eyeballs, which
Mm-hmm.
enables you to, in theory, get more money. But it's definitely not usually or not always a linear relationship as to how much eyes and attention you're getting as to money. And there's different dynamics that come into play when there's only a really small number of people looking at you, but maybe perhaps they're closer to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so they know you. And so they are more valuable to you in some ways, but maybe they're less valuable to you in some ways.
Yeah.
And because one important thing that is an easy thing to forget is the people around you are not always your audience, which can be hard as a creator. When you're creating something, the first people you generally show it to are the people around you, your friends and your family. And a really easy thing to do is you show it to Susie, and then Susie's like, "No, this isn't funny, or this isn't good." And it's like, well, there's a possible chance it's
But
just
my
not funny
mom
or
thought
good.
it was good.
But my mom thought it was good. Exactly.
Yeah, she hung it up on the fridge.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, it can go either way, right? Like you can be talking with people close by and they can be telling you something is good and, puffing you up and making you feel inspired, or they could tell you it sucks and deflate you. And hopefully what I hope and what I guide you guys out there is just be honest with the person, right? And if you're going to be negative, give some positive, constructive feedback, right? But then the message to the creator is don't necessarily rely on the message of those around you, because it may be completely different than what your actual audience might be.
Yeah, that's I mean, most of us end up in sort of bubbles or groups, and when you're an artist, you're usually creating around other artists and you're being inspired by them. I would say it's the same with like philosophy and these kind of things. You hear about salons of people that hang out together and discuss ideas, and then they end up sort of discussing around a certain concepts that they get digging deeper and deeper into. And so I think this can happen in a lot of fields. It's also, science, for instance. You can go down a rabbit hole of one field and you can just really kind of be in that group, making the same kind of decisions, having the same kind of arguments. And, I guess the book Range was talking about ways to step outside of being in these little static pods and, jumping fields entirely, not just having one friend group, right? So there's a lot of kind of options there, but yeah, it's quality is tough to figure out. Not only that, but sometimes you can be pretty sure what you're doing is good, but the market has not caught up yet. I had a former boss who told me at one point that by the time the art world is like the buying art world is ready to buy your stuff, you've already moved on because you're a creative individual and you're chasing down ideas and experimenting all the time. And honestly, it might take the art world between 5 to 10 years to get accustomed to your style of art and recognize it and then want it. But by then, you're off doing something completely different. And so a lot of artists shoot themselves in the foot as far as, you know, making money according to like the public. So that's one of the problems with sort of being a widget producer, especially when you're going after a specialized style.
Yeah, and if I had a dollar every time I heard an artist that got famous or became really well known or got rich either after they died or years if not decades after their central body of work, like
Yeah.
that seems to be a very common theme. And so yeah, this is another aspect in the art world of it's not logical decisions you're necessarily dealing with, and there's a lot of factors to at play about this whole social dynamic and what do people value as a whole, and the more popular things are, especially in certain circles, can completely elevate the value of it. But if something trends from this small tiny collective circle to a giant general population, I can imagine that actually could devalue some types of work.
Yeah, it's
a
so
really complicated
funny.
market, right? I'm
Right,
sure.
yeah. And the art market is a sort of fascinating thing, and I guess we don't need to tackle all of it today, but yeah, there does become these dynamics where it's like just with music, it's like if somebody becomes too popular, you're no longer indie enough, so you lose this kind of hip audience because you have actually transcended into popularity, and then people feel let down by you, and so this is a kind of a fun thing to think about is getting so big that people hate you simply because you're big.
Yeah.
It's not a problem that I've had, so I only see it from the outside, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it sounds fun. And the main thing we're trying to talk about here is procrastination, but it's really hard to talk about that in this art world without acknowledging at least some of the complexities
Yeah,
and things
yeah.
that can come up. But so when we're talking about the art world and how when you're creating a piece, it's like, all right, who am I creating this for? Is it going to go to the general population? Is it going to go to a gallery? Am I going to try and sell it? Am I just going to show it to help raise the value of my collection? There's a bunch of these decisions that end up having to come. But one of the decisions that inherently has to come is, as I'm creating this art, when am I done? When is good enough?
Mm-hmm.
Because especially, a lot of times it's hard to know when enough is enough, when, there's a phrase, done is better than perfect, right? But one could obviously argue in the art world, things could always be tweaked, right? Because it's such a subjective lens, and it's like, oh, there could always be another shade, another stroke, another whatever.
Yeah.
So that's one of the big questions I wanted to ask you about. Is we're talking about procrastination here, because it's often tied with finishing a project. How do you know when something is done? I mean, is it strictly just a deadline, or what?
I mean, that's one of the reasons I think I was bringing up the gallery situations previously, is that a lot of times you're creating towards an exhibit, you're creating towards a show. Now, it's much different when you're just creating. You're just making all the time, and you're making stuff, and you get to a certain point and you're like, yeah, that's about as far as I want to go. Sometimes I think what happens is you learn the lesson you need to learn. As you're making something, there are problems that present themselves to you. And once you have overcome those problems, you can consider the piece done and you can move on to the next problem. And so that's one way of kind of thinking about it. Other people have a vision in their head and they're just going to execution. There was like a creative moment, and it might have been 2 months ago. They jotted down the ideas and now they're simply executing it. And so that's a different level where you're not necessarily creative problem solving, you're just finishing the piece. And so it's kind of difficult to think of it in terms of creativity and having muses, because the creativity thing shows up usually quite early in the process, and then the rest of it is just grinding it out. You're just flat out working, and somewhere along the way you're just like, yeah, that's enough work, this has gone far enough. And I've done pieces before where I literally time myself, and once I put in about 40 hours, I'm like, okay, that's it, I'm done. I've worked a week of, normal week of work on this piece. And I'm like, so that will have to be it. Because there is this idea that it could go on forever. And what are you going to do if you do go on forever? Is it going to make the thing any more valuable? Is it going to gain you any more reputation? Is it getting the concept across? Like, is there a concept at all? So sometimes it's the vehicle, might be an idea. Like, I just need this piece to get an idea out into the world. And at that point, maybe you don't do all the trim work. You just get the piece built and out.
Yeah, and again, there's a lot of good nuggets in here, but I'm thinking of it through the lens of being a company that shares knowledge, right, and ideas.
Yeah.
And kind of like you have your podcast, Let Us Think About It. It's another area where you are publishing and sharing ideas for people. But just like you were saying, there are different levels of development of that idea or commentary or whatnot that are, I don't know, said needed, or just that you can create, right? Like, and that's where different platforms lend themselves better towards certain things, right? So if it's just like a pithy one-liner you came up with off a whim, it sounds like a Twitter type of thing, right?
Yeah.
But if it's like an hour and a half of deep discussion on a single topic, then, that sounds kind of more like something might lend itself better towards a podcast, right? And then, that you have the giant in between where, kind of like we were talking about, well, maybe these clips are the type of thing that come from it. But then you have to be careful about taking things out of context,
Yeah. But, if people don't have a hook or a way to get in, and this was the same thing with visual arts as it can be with a podcast or a business or a widget, you have to have some way to entice somebody in. And oftentimes that's some version of marketing. A lot of people will never turn on a show that's going to be an hour and a half long. They just look at the timestamp and they're just like, nope,
right,
not doing it. So how do you entice somebody in? And those are different levels. So when you're doing the creation process, I think there's several stages you could stop at along the way, or you could keep going. But I don't even know, oftentimes I think the piece tells you itself when you're done or when you're at an end point. There's also deadlines and pressure, and at some point you realize you're just being ridiculous or nitpicky, and you just go, okay, so is it more important once again to have this object out in the world in its current state, or to keep hammering on it?
Yeah.
Like, to try to get it perfect? Because you know, that other phrase about, you know, perfection is the enemy of the good or whatever it is. So you'll never get the good thing out if you're always trying to make it perfect. So there are these little invisible lines. I would say that some of it's instinctual and that over time that instinct varies. So what I used to consider a good piece when I was young, a good drawing, for instance, I would now not put out into the world because my skill level has increased and the way I think about things has increased. So I would take a different tact on it today. But I think those things have to evolve, and I think you have to be a little bit forgiving of your current self until you can get to that sort of more nuanced self.
Yeah, and I guess I also point out that even though a drawing, you might not put out a drawing at the same state of doneness that you would then, I would venture that it's possible you would get to that same state of doneness in a quicker time
Mm.
because of the skills you've developed. Obviously, there's a lot of factors there, and
Yeah,
it
I would
depends on
hope
all that
so.
kind of
But
stuff. But
sometimes it's not true. Sometimes you're just slaving away.
yeah,
And this is the part that kills me about television shows. They try to make everything look easy. I at one point was asked to be on one of these reality shows. I can't remember the name of it. Where you were supposed to make some sort of art piece within a few seconds. Like they're like, well, you got 1 minute. Like we want you to make one of your gunpowder drawings in 1 minute and make it exciting. And you're basically like supposed to be like dancing around the piece and doing
right.
this and do like. And I was just like, what? Like there is like at that point it's not really art. I'm just like making an explosion for you. And it's a different kind of art. It's like
Right.
performance art. But I had to kind of realize that like this wasn't going to help me or my career as much as I thought it might. And not only that, it was totally shifting who and what I was. Like you build reputation and authority in one space doing one kind of thing, and then somebody says, "Hey, if you come over here and fancify this, you might become more popular." And that was a transition that I tried to make, but I wasn't like I couldn't pull it off. And so there's something about that too, just sort of realizing what you're capable of and when you can do things. And just sort of realizing, yeah, I could crank out 30-second or 1 minute art pieces, but wasn't happy with them. And so then you're just like, so what am I doing it for? And then you have to like
Yeah.
reconsider a lot of facets of like of your business model and where you want to go and where you want to end up.
Just to be clear, we're not talking about your sex life here. We're still talking about the creative
We're
process.
still talking about that.
Okay.
Yeah, the art thing. But yeah, as far as procrastination goes, let's circle back on it because I find that oftentimes I do procrastinate. I think a lot of people do. Um, I tend to procrastinate when I can't get the idea to work properly.
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought up the idea because I started to talk about how, in the knowledge space, but also then I started to think, well, that actually translates to this other space too. So I think it abstracts decently well, but one of the points I wanted to make was at the end of the day, whoever's consuming the thing that you're going to produce, how much are they going to care at all? And then how much are they going to notice all of the little tiny things that
Yes.
you think are just
Yes.
utterly important, right? And in the case of a piece of art, maybe that's the final shading or the final, color you put on it. I don't know enough to know what all the final touches might be. The different shapes. I need to do this with the framing. Oh, I need to do this overall treatment of the canvas,
Yeah.
whatever. All of the things that you might do. In the case of a video that we're creating, for example, it's like, do we need a different sound effect? Do we need a different transition? Oh, do we need another take? Did that come across well enough? Even before that, there's the research and the script and all that kind of stuff. Oh, do we need to do all of these things, right? And in the case of something like software companies, like, we're going to create this stuff and it's not exactly ironed out in this small area, but guess what? 97.3% of users are going to benefit from this thing.
Yeah.
And then there's that small, 2.7%. They're going to experience some kind of bug or change, and they're not going to be very happy about it. And so,
Do you go ahead and release it or not?
yeah, do you release it or not? And that's the real question. So yeah, how do you know? I mean, it sounds like you listed a couple of strategies in the art world, which one of them sounds like, just set a date and be done at that time. Another one and that's like a hard deadline, right?
Yeah.
And the other one is to set an amount of time that you're willing to work on it, and you just say, oh, I'm going to spend X amount of time working on this, and when that's done, I'm going to call it done.
Yeah.
And then a third one is, take it outside of your control altogether, right? And you get a forced deadline or a forced amount of time from a client or a show or something like that. Are there other ways you can think of where it's like, how do you know when's enough is enough?
Yeah, third party, having somebody else come in and tell you to stop. when I was teaching elementary school, the best art you could get from the kids is when you took it away from them, because if you let them keep playing, they'll mess it up. So there was a stage where it was great, and then after that they just keep blah 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 blah, and then there's all of a sudden you just have mud paint everywhere. So part of it is timing, as sometimes having a third party come in and be like, stop. I mean, it's why people, bands get sort of a director to help them out with an album, and so you can, or a producer to help them with the album, so you can do things like that as well. But I think more of what we're talking about is just daily procrastination, and I think it's the small things. Like, I could be producing art all the time, but I'm not. So why am I not producing it? Especially when I know I feel good doing it and it helps my career, and yet I'm not spending very much time doing it. So that's a huge question. Like, that has something to do with motivation and ambition and priorities, and those are all big things.
Yeah, so I mean, I gotta ask. It sounded like you could relate to that last sentence there.
Yeah, yeah.
How is that going through your head as you're
Oh,
saying
it
it?
is. Like, I've had this like goal to make these, just some little kind of almost like 7 by 10 inch drawings that have these kind of silhouetted figures on them, and they're this not a big deal at all, and yet I can't seem to sit down and make it happen. And I'm just like, well, you just got to block off some time and do it. But there's always something else. You've got a podcast to run. You've got a shop to fix. You got this to do. You got that to do. And then how about, yesterday I invited friends over. I could have blocked off that time for doing art stuff, but I didn't. And it's so there's a kind of a fascinating thing in there of feeling overwhelmed mentally and not wanting to take the next step until I feel better. Like, I keep thinking that there will be a spot where all of a sudden I will feel this desire to create again. And I'm waiting on that to show up. But almost every really successful person that I've bumped into or have read about, they just say, no, you can't wait for the muse to show up. You just got to go in there and do it every day. You do. If you're Hemingway, you wake up at 5 a.m. and you write for 3 hours every day. There isn't this idea of a muse coming down and tapping you on the shoulder.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that because, I know I can definitely relate to a lot of things you're talking about, and I can picture a bunch of people in my head who can relate as well. And I've heard basically the same kind of sentence from, right? It's like, hey, I know I want to do this thing. I know I'm actually good at this thing. And of course, some people waver with their confidence level on that, but they are actually good at the thing. And it's like, if I could just create this thing, then I know it would make me feel better. It would be something that I would enjoy, maybe even something I could make money off of. But yeah, I need to wait for the right time to do it. And I would agree with you in that, in general, that's not something people should be doing. But on the flip side, it's something where you do need to have a little bit of grace for yourself. Like for example, with you, it's like, hey, you had a lot going on. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you were
It's
doing
it's
this and
okay.
that and
Yeah.
that and that and that. Like, it's okay that you didn't get to that next thing, right? Like, if you were sitting around doing nothing all the time and then you couldn't get to it, well, then yeah, maybe it's like, okay, a little bit more. But even
Yeah.
then, like, for our listeners out there who might be in that spot where they're doing nothing and they just want to start doing something, right? And I think that's one of the biggest things that I've internalized a lot is, one, having grace for yourself and recognizing, the right amount of push for you where you are in this, roller coaster of life. And guess what? If you're at the higher end of your roller coaster, you're feeling great, then maybe it's okay to push yourself a little more. But if you're in the low end, you're in one of those dips and you're not feeling too hot, well, if you just beat yourself up and then say, I should be able to do these things, I know I can do these things, then guess what? It's actually going to have the opposite effect a lot of times. It's just going to drive you deeper and lower and make you not want to do the thing, which is going to drive you lower. And it just gets this vicious cycle,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And and this is another thing though, is to push back in the opposite way, is that if you are at the bottom, you're down there and you're feeling low, sometimes the only thing that's going to get you out of feeling low is to actually do the thing. And yet we're so interested now in forgiving ourselves that we never maybe get around to actually doing the thing. And so
Right.
that's a version of like tough love on yourself, or somebody else needs to sort of hold you to something. One of the things that when I brought up running collectives, you're with a group of people. And there's something about being in a social group where if you don't pull your weight, you let the group down. And there's a fascinating aspect in there where, it's almost like dragging people kicking and screaming into success who are trying to self-sabotage the whole time. And there's a lot of hand holding, there's a lot of love that has to be shared, there's a lot of things that happen. But for a lot of people, the only way that they actually get around to finishing pieces, especially at a more prolific rate, is to have some sort of external system around them that is actually helping them achieve. And this can, once they look back and go, look at all these things I achieved, it pulls them out of being at this pit, at this bottom spot of telling themselves they're a procrastinator. They realize that they're not a procrastinator. They just haven't had the right framework around them.
Yeah, and it's also worth pointing out that, guess what? There are some people who are in that pit, and then they do these things. They create things that are from outside measures objectively successful, maybe even objectively make them rich.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are still some people who they end up still feeling bad, and that's just part of their body chemistry and how it works. But then they recognize that, hey, this is just how I feel, and this is, the cards I was dealt, but I can still create all these great things, right?
Yeah.
And so it's this tough balance, right, of figuring out, hey, how do I feel? What am I creating? What's the point? All those types of things. But it's very important one to get through. And I want to point out for those of you at home, like, yes, this social aspect where you're getting other people involved, that can be a huge step for you. And not just anybody, but, most everybody. At the end of the day, when you look at our caveman history, us as humans, as animals, we are social animals. And so there are things that we're wired to do and respond to when we're with other of our kind, other humans, right? And pushing through and doing the difficult thing, if you look at it from a herd mentality, if there's a lion chasing you, you're trying to be with that herd for safety. You're trying to be with them,
Yeah. There's some other things too. I've heard before that, like for instance, I've heard that comedians probably had a tough home life, otherwise they wouldn't be so funny. So this kind of tendency to need to produce might be coming from sort of like toxic places as well. And that's a difficult sort of thing to get your head around, is that this sort of desire to be productive and ambitious, to sort of find validity in the external world, means producing external things that go out into the world, and you're trying to find yourself through those. And that's a very tricky spot to get in. So a lot of times you can be making things and they're going out into the external world, and you're looking for validation from that in order to like pick yourself up out of this bottom of this pit or curve that you're under. And that's a very difficult thing to get engaged in, because as well, once you put this thing out into the world, it's also a piece of you. And so your identity is really wrapped up in the creation process. And so when you're sort of in the midst of procrastinating, I'm often curious, like if it's somebody who's having sort of issues with their own identity and putting themselves out into the world, if they're unsure about this thing, that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is they're so healthy mentally that they don't need external validation. So why not procrastinate? So there's like, those are two flip sides of the same coin there. Like if you're super healthy, you're fine. You don't need to throw all these things out into the world for validation. Someone like me, maybe I'm producing a lot of stuff because I'm still seeking some sort of affirmation or validation from the world, or from some vision of myself that I have in my head that I have not yet achieved. And so that's kind of a darker side of needing to produce in order to become.
And then there's also just hey, I don't have some greater reason, or whether negative or positive, just like I just find value in producing, whether it's enjoyable.
Yeah, which I would say
whatnot,
would be
right?
so much healthier.
Right?
Yeah. I'm just kind of throwing all that out there as like options for thinking about this.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of these paths and lenses and stuff are things that I know I can definitely relate to, and hopefully some people at home can as well. But one really important point that I wanted to make for those of you out there, in case you didn't catch it in here, which is, if you find yourself in a spot where you are repeatedly, quote unquote, failing to do a thing, well, maybe look at how you're doing the thing and who's around you while you're doing this thing, and what the environment is when those things. And instead of just looking at yourself and you always being the one who's wrong and is failing, don't get me wrong, that can still happen. It literally can just be, get over yourself and you need to do it, right? But oftentimes there's more at play, right? And it's not just you, something is wrong with you. It's all of the things that are around you. And maybe that means, hey, I need to get out of the place where I am, where I'm doing this, right? Maybe it's I'm at home, I need to go to another spot. Maybe it's at work, I need to go for a walk. Maybe I need to go work from a
Mm.
cafe. Maybe I need to literally move to a different location to change that aspect. Maybe it's the time of day that's not working for me. Maybe I need to get some people around me, because it turns out like when I'm working in period, or when I'm working on this type of problem, I work better when there are people around me, instead of me just looking at this thing, failing at this thing, feeling bad, and staying in that cycle. Well, I have those people around me. It's like, hey, I'm struggling here, or even just like I'm having a mental block. And then you have other people to help bring you up, help keep you charged. And if there's one thing I know as a solo entrepreneur, it's really easy to fall down that woe is me, I'm all alone, there's so many things to do, I'm overwhelmed. It's really easy to fall into that place. So I guess, any response to that overall, or even specifically as related to you?
No, I think that there's I mean, I so yes, of course I have a response to it, but uh I think that a lot of this is some part of this for me anyway, that when I get into this woe is me state is just sitting down and grinding something out picks me back up. And I've realized that about myself. So there are certain aspects that you can kind of figure out for yourself. I don't know what they are for every different individual. People operate differently. But one of the things that I've found is that a lot of procrastination and worrying is that you tend to increase your own anxiety and stress levels without actually producing anything. And so all of your extra energy is caught up in this kind of procrastination loop. And it's like, if you could just redirect that, like redirect that into the productivity. Why are you spending your time procrastinating? Like, and it just sort of just, if you can find a way to redirect it. And I don't know what that looks like for everybody else. I know that for me, there just is an internal alarm clock that starts ticking. It's like, nope, you've spent enough time dilly dallying around, get after it. And so that's, I think, just inbuilt over years and years of doing this. So sort of shaping yourself over years might be an answer.
Do you go as far as to, recognizing that you are going to procrastinate and therefore like allowing it, or you just kind of notice when it's going on and then you take action
Yeah,
after that?
I notice when it's going on now. I think there were times before where I would just procrastinate, but there are also times before where I was just creating all day, every day, and that was my drug. And so it's a little bit different, when you get a day job and you can't do that anymore. So then you're creating at night, but then that creation takes away from your life with your wife or your family. And so you start realizing, oh, I can't do this all the time. This has to be like a window. But I also sort of notice when I'm doing something sort of pointless and I'm like, oh, if I spent 30 minutes here, I would be productive. Do I want to spend my time doing that? And then you actually make a decision. And so there's a level of awareness there. Like I think I mentioned to you the other day that yesterday, for the first time in a long time, I played a bit of a video game. And it's been probably a year since I've touched a video game. But what I ended up having to tell myself is, yes, you could go back out in your shop and do X, Y, and Z, but I don't think you're going to be any happier doing that. Like you're actually exhausted right now. And it was like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was wiped out because I'd been working all morning. And so sometimes I just have to make a decision for myself and just be like, this is not as valuable as my own personal health. And so I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but I think that there are moments where you just have to decide, and that alarm clock can go off, whatever the siren is. And if you don't have the siren going off, I don't know what you do to sort of set that up. I don't know if you set up timers for yourself. I don't know if you put yourself into situations where you literally time block. You put yourself into a coffee shop for 3 hours and you only have one sticky note on your computer that says, keep working on this one thing. Don't get distracted. Like, I don't know. I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah, so we don't have enough time to get into it today, but I think if not tomorrow, later this week, we're going to talk a little bit more about time blocking and what it is, how people at home can do it, and how it can be helpful, and of course some of the traps that you can fall into from doing it as well. Because if there's one thing at home that you might be asking is like, guys, it doesn't really sound like you gave me a completely solid answer. Like, what's the magic pill? What's the one thing I do, right?
Yeah, if you're looking for that out of me, wrong guy.
right, wrong guy. But also, just it just doesn't exist, right? I
Mm.
mean, that's part of the problem. That's why procrastination is still such a big thing. But there are a lot of these different paths you can go down, and being aware of the paths that you're going down, and doing that pattern recognition and saying like, okay, all right, I realize that my apartment's looking cleaner than it has in a week. That doesn't normally happen unless I'm trying to avoid something,
Mm.
or I'm playing this video game, and I said I was going to do it for an hour and a half, but now it's been 3 hours, and maybe I need to be doing that other thing, whatever it may look like for you, or maybe it's productive procrastination, even doing work, right? It's like, oh, all right, well, I'm at inbox 0, but was that the most important thing that I need to be working on? So, when it comes to procrastination, one of the inherent factors is deciding what is the most important for me to do right now. So
Mhm.
prioritization, and then also some of it is deciding when you're going to be done, and then there's the whole mental aspect of it as well, and self-talk is a big part of it too. So there's a lot of things in there, right? And we started off, we talked a little bit about the art world, and some of the different factors at play in that, and both from the producer side, the consumer side, and from the gallery side, and then we shifted a little bit more into when you're in that creative process, what how do you know when enough is enough, and what are some of the different techniques you could
Yeah.
use to have that terminal time or days.
Yeah, and it's so weird how most of the artists and creators I meet just say they just know when something is done, which is fascinating because that means that you only develop that skill by doing it. So you will never know if you're done unless you have made enough stuff. And then the feeling kicks in, then you know.
Right.
So there's a kind of a training that happens there. So I would kind of also start saying that. That's one of the things that we're talking about too is you can set up systems all day, but nothing's going to teach you the feel for something, which is basically a skill. But you'll develop this skill over time. Just on the only way to really get there is by doing the thing. So that's also a fascinating side of procrastination is sort of being like, well, I don't know when I'm done exactly. Well, you know,
Yeah.
that's a tricky chicken egg
Well, that's
syndrome.
that's one thing that I've really enjoyed about looking more into the art world and learning a little bit more, whether it be through video creation or just straight up drawing or whatnot. And there's a couple of things that some of my friends have done that have kind of helped open the way that I look at stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of them is I have a friend who they did what's called the 365 challenge, and that's where you do something for a day for a whole year. And for them, they did an illustration every day, and talking with them throughout the whole year. Some days it was like, oh well, I scribbled a little something down at 11:50 so I can make sure to
Yeah,
get it
yeah.
in. But then other days is they found themselves spending a longer time on it, right? And like, oh, this is something I was really inspired by and was doing it. But now, and this was a couple of days ago, they finished, and they now have 365 illustrations. Which, first off,
Yeah. Bravo.
congratulations.
Bravo.
I mean, I think that's just such a cool thing to do, right?
Yeah.
And also, you never know what's going to come out of that, right? And different types of art and things might come from those days where you're not really feeling it. And this person actually found themselves seeing their emotions and their thoughts reflected somewhat in the illustrations they were making, and they're like, oh yeah, this period got a little dark, but then it kind of came back over here. And then sometimes it's just a very rough sketch, and other times it's more like filled out, and maybe it has some color and it has these other things. But so I really liked that aspect of what they were doing, is like, all right, just by the repetition. We talked about it before on the show. I think, are you trying to take just those 20 pictures, or are you going to take 200 or 2,000 just so you're
Mm-hmm.
getting the reps in, and then just by straight up statistics, you're more likely to get something that is good, right?
Yeah, I mean it's just a sort of a fascinating thing too, because you and I have talked a lot about systems and setting up frameworks for yourself and this, that, and the other. But the fascinating thing about frameworks and systems is you can spend so much time on your system that you still aren't productive.
Right.
And so there is a version of procrastination now that probably has always existed, but is to set up systems for yourself It's just like cleaning your house or prepping the studio before actually getting to the painting, where you're spending so much time doing that that you're sort of fetishizing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
You're not fetishizing or not fetishizing, but you're not producing the thing that will actually generate value for you in the long term because you're so fixated on the systems themselves. And this is something else where it's nice to have somebody else come in and go like, hey,
Hey,
snap out of it.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very worth noticing that this is not the first time we've mentioned somebody else. Even if you are a loner by your own definition, very introverted, there's value in having somebody else. Even if it's just a coach, as we talked about a little bit with Hunter on Friday, there's value in having somebody outside yourself to see things from an objective place to help you decide the best path to go forward. And so maybe that's a coach, maybe that's a therapist, and yes, there's value in having family and friends involved, but there's also value in having, a person who's far enough removed to where they are still going to give you that tough love that you need. And even better, if they're working on something similar to you, or they have worked on something similar to you, so they have that experience and they can know where you've been, and they can be like, all right, Ryder, I know where you're at. You're in that case where you're spending about 3 weeks polishing this thing and you just need to get it out. I know because I was just there last Friday. Like, there's value in that.
Yeah, there's so much in there, and just ooh, yeah. There's also the just having some self-awareness is really helpful. And having the self-awareness to know when you need help. I think that takes a fairly healthy person. I think it takes a healthy people to wrap other people into their lives, and especially when you're doing something that involves so much self-identification, such as creation. People get really wrapped up in what they create. They get really proud of it, and it's natural. It's very natural, and it's very hard to open yourself up to criticism for that. So, all that to say, if you're doing it, bravo. Like, good job. That's a huge step. There's so many people in the world that want to create but don't. There's so many people in the world that are just trolls about what other people create. So if you're creating anything at all, well done. Like, that's a huge
bravo.
step. Yeah.
Because, we were just talking before the mics went on here. You're like, oh, I just got a nice little comment. And it's like, oh, it seemed like they were maybe listening but not listening all the way. And that's another big realization as a creator, is that regardless of what you create, people are going to say good things about it or bad things about it. And it only takes about a second for somebody to make some negative judgment on the thing. Whereas it takes a really long time to create a thing, right? Yeah. Which is another, an interesting realization that I had was, keep in mind as a creator, people who are consuming your stuff don't necessarily know all the work and thought and effort and stuff that went into what came out. And so just because on the outside it's like, oh, you've only produced, 2 works or whatever, like, what's going on? Well, it's like, well, you don't know all of the things behind it, right? And then again, it goes to that balance of, okay, being graceful to yourself, making sure you're not, beating yourself up too much. But then there's also like, yeah, you only got 2 out, and maybe I should be getting more, right? So there's that balance, that ping pong, if you will. You want to keep things moving forward. The other thing that another friend did that I really helped me kind of shift was making sure to be viewing things as a draft. And even if something's done, you could just call that your final draft, and you could always come back and revise it again, right? I mean, if you look at books, you look at movies, and you look at albums like music, guess what? They have remastered versions that come out later. They have remakes and stuff like that later. I'm sure there's a lot of people that you recognize the big names, like, oh, Steven Spielberg or Michael Jackson or whatever. Like, you don't think they have 1 or 2 things on their piece of work that they're like, oh, I wish this was done differently. And we didn't even touch on it today, but we will another day where, oh, well, Steve wanted to do that. That was his idea, and we all think it was a bad idea. So the whole group dynamic.
Yeah, when we were talking about the collective, we could go into that at some point. But yeah, I think there's a lot there, and there's, I can't remember the name of the famous author who basically said, if I considered anything, I think it's Slavoj Žižek, a philosopher. Yes, thank you.
Slavoj Žižek. That sounds like Russian or
Ukrainian,
or
I think.
Okay. Eastern European.
Yeah, and he's a pretty famous philosopher that's still alive today and makes pretty interesting commentary. But his whole thing was like, if I ever thought that I was writing the finished product, I would never get it done.
Yeah.
So putting the weight of the world on yourself to make a masterpiece might be the exact thing that's stopping you. So sometimes, like, I like this idea of it being a draft. I'm just putting out iterations of things into the world, and eventually we'll see if that culminates into something. And that might give you the sort of freedom mentally to actually get your creation going.
Yeah, and that's one of the beauties of what we're doing here is we're doing these things live, especially as we engage more with the audience is, hey, we have some ideas, we have some things that we think could be valuable to people, and we're going to talk about them and we're going to develop them a little bit. And then if things resonate, if something is people find really valuable or they want to take a certain aspect of and dive a little deeper in, things like that, well, this is kind of like our V0, our rough draft. Like here, we're talking about this, and then people give us a signal, say, hey, we really want to know more about this. We want to know more about that. Or could you talk to an expert on that? Well, guess what? That's part of what we're doing with Helpful for Life here and with What the Hell is Water is we're using this as a creation process. We're taking out all of these things that we could dive into deeper and find things that we think people could find helpful across this broad range and spectrum. And instead of, me doing this in a room and guessing and putting things out there and just hoping, now we're trying to get to the point where, all right, we build a little bit of an audience and we start showing that audience things and seeing, all right, what do they find valuable? What do they want more of? And then providing some of it, right? And then some of that's also recognizing, hey, they don't think they need more of it, but there's this thing over here they really need to hear. And so it's that balance as we're running the company is, all right, how much do we do of just what they want and what they're going to buy, right. The candy, if you will, and then how do we get the fruits and vegetables in there?
Yeah, having the hook and the meat and all these good things. Yeah, it's a process and we're figuring it out on the fly a little bit, but I don't know if anyone doesn't figure it out on the fly. I mean, it's also the idea of we are putting content out into the world. We're creating things. So then it's just a matter of refinement at this point.
Yeah. Well, from today's talk, we started off, I mean, it was pretty much all centering around procrastination, but we talked a little bit about the art world, how the different factors at play there, what the structure is. Then we went into how do you know when a work is done, and do you ever really know, or are you just kind of drawing a line in the sand? And then we talked a little bit about how this all ties into your mental state and, recognizing that sometimes you just need a change of environment. And another big thing that we took out is maybe you need one and or multiple other people involved in this process, if as nothing else, just to be a check for you or a coach and someone for you to bounce things off of, or someone to say, hey, are you falling into that loop that you've fallen into? And we've pointed out how important self-awareness can be. And I wanted to make sure to point out with self-awareness, like it is a process to get better at that. But the first step, in my opinion, to figuring out self-awareness is notice when you feel a little off. Just notice when something feels a little weird. Like, all right, I feel like I'm kind of, this sounds weird, but it's actually true. I feel like I'm kind of clenching my butt right now. I'm kind of tight. Like I feel kind of off. Like, that's noticing something, weird. I feel kind of on edge. I feel kind of nervous. I feel kind of.
Well, be careful when you relax that butt.
Yeah. Relax. Ooh, that slipped on out. But then, or like I feel, fearful or sweaty or my palms, if you're starting to notice any of these feelings, like that's the first step of self-awareness is recognizing something feels off. And then after that, you recognize, okay, well, where do we go from there? Okay, I feel a little off. What's happened in the recent past that it could be linked to? Oh, well, I just noticed, so-and-so said that thing to me, which kind of hurt my feelings, or that reminded me of something, when another person did this or whatever. There's all these things where it could be, but the first step of self-awareness is just noticing something feels a little off. And it's very valuable, right?
Yeah.
And it could come into play in your work and your personal life and so much more. So a little bit of a side tangent, but I wanted to make sure that, because we talked about how important self-awareness is, but we didn't necessarily say, well, how do you even start, right? So then after talking about the mental side of things, I think that was the last pretty much that we talked about.
Yeah, we're talking more about the mental side, and so we did dive into some of these psychological issues you might have, but yeah, there's a lot of things, and sometimes the cure for procrastination is just
just doing the thing.
Just doing the thing, and I know it's gonna hurt, but you'll feel better afterwards. And that procrastination takes work as well, and it's just like worrying. Worrying takes work. It takes a lot of energy. So if you want to think of it from an efficiency standpoint, just redirect that energy.
Yeah, there's a phrase that's something like those who worry lose twice or something like that. Yeah. And it's like, well, by worrying, all you're doing is you're putting your energy, which if you think of it from like a physics perspective, is like the energy's got to come from somewhere and it's got to be conserved. So you're just taking that energy from you and you're putting into this ball of worry versus putting it into the work itself, right?
Yeah.
And, maybe sometimes there's something you need to do to knock that rock free. So maybe you work on this one thing that's right next to it, adjacent, and that gets your engine going, and then you transition over to the main task. It's a little harder or whatever. And there's some other techniques that I'm sure we'll get into over the days. But yeah, that's kind of procrastination as a meandering discussion.
Yeah. Sorry that wasn't more clear cut for all of you. It's a difficult topic, and I think that we all develop our own sort of coping mechanisms for it. But hopefully, you found some of those insights. Maybe one of them you can latch on to.
Yeah. So, random thought. The word seminary, what does that mean? I'm trying to think of a word that starts with S. It's like discussion.
Seminal?
Socratic. What about that one?
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, I don't know. I was trying to think. We've got procrastination and meandering. We got PM. So I was like, we PMS. Can we make it happen? I don't know. See, this is how acronyms happen sometimes.
Nothing is coming to mind right now, but Socratic is a good phrase.
Procrastination, meandering, Socratic. That sounds like it means
silly. Maybe
it sounds like it means what it means. But anyways, sometimes you just got to be creative and go for it.
Another good one is solipsistic.
Oh
yeah.
All right. Well, so from our discussion today, does anything jump out in your head that would be a good challenge for our listeners at home?
When you were talking about awareness, I think there's so much that is key to just like to watching your own behavior and just being like, oh, what am I doing right now? Why am I doing this? And maybe one time today that would be the challenge for me, is at one point today, just sort of watch yourself doing something and go, why am I doing this? And just have that little question run through your head, and just, you don't have to judge that moment, but just being aware of that moment is a great start. You might find that once you're aware of it, you change your behavior.
I'm really glad that you added in there. You do not have to judge that behavior, because again, this is step one of the whole getting better with yourself and your head and your feelings and your thoughts and all of that is recognizing. Do not judge, because guess what? It's a whole process, right? Yeah. And the more aware you get, it's actually, you're aware of all of the things that you could be doing better. And so it's also a trap to fall into, where it's like, oh, now I know all of the things that I'm doing wrong, which can lead to people becoming negative and down on themselves. And so that's a very important step, is to just start recognizing, start moving towards that, okay, realization, something's a little different here. And then after that, you can maybe work on shifting the things if you need to. And maybe you don't. Maybe you do everything perfectly right, like myself, and then we're good.
I mean, it's really actually kind of hard to even have these conversations with Reed, because he's just such a stranger to all this stuff.
I just feel like just starting to levitate from...
You're just like, oh.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's a great challenge. So recap it one more time for our people at home.
Yeah, just take a moment to just sort of watch what you're doing during some point of the day. Just be like, oh, why am I doing this? What am I doing right now? You don't have to judge it. You just kind of say, I'm doing this thing.
Yeah.
And then that in itself might change your behavior. It tends to change it for me. It's just like, why am I still sitting here doing the same thing?
Yeah, kind of like we were talking about when one of our challenges last week, which was turn off the Netflix autoplay. It helps you have that auto trigger, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting here like a nerd thinking like, okay, basically I want to have this background process running in my head all day. It's like, hey, look for times where something's weird is going on, and you just kind of turn that on today, turn that on right now, and just let that kind of go. And then sometime throughout the day, hopefully it'll fire and be like, hey, oh, you're kind of angry right now, or
you've been standing in the kitchen staring at a bag of peas for 5 minutes.
Yeah, or maybe you're like hovering over that share button for a really long time.
There's this lovely button on YouTube.
Yeah,
on the What the Hell is Water channel.
Yeah, you have your phone out and you're about to call a friend and be like, man, these guys, they were talking to me today. And now I'm sending you a clip of where he talked about how they were talking about me. So you could see exactly where I was when I had this moment.
So meta.
And then I shared it. And then the other person answered it, said, wow, this is such a really good show.
You know what? I'm going to share this with 10 of my friends.
Yes.
And those 10 friends are going to share it with 10 of their friends.
And then they three-way with the other person on the phone.
So
and like,
many
wow,
phones.
did you hear what they said on that show? Wait. Why does the phone even look like this? It's 2021.
This is so weird. Phones don't do this anymore. They're more like this.
This is how we talk now.
Phone slap.
And actually, realistically, it's more like the Bluetooth. So it's just more like these little ears.
little buds.
Yeah.
We'll just
Yeah, and honestly, it's 2021, so it's more like this. It's like, bloop, bloop, bloop. Oh, hello, talk to me. Yeah. And with that, this has been What the Hell is Water. Thank you guys for watching, and have a wonderful day.